1. In my mid-20s, I worked at a subacute rehab facility. Generally, these places exist to help those who are struggling after an accident, surgery, etc., regain their mobility and quality of life with the help of physical therapy and around-the-clock nursing care. I worked in the dementia unit. These patients were long-term, and most ended up living out the rest of their days there. Although it was called the dementia unit, our patients were compromised of those suffering from permanent or long-term brain-related conditions. Those included dementia, Alzheimer's, comas, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, and brain tumors. These are the experiences I had working there. 1. A disembodied hand. I had just clocked in for the evening and received report from the day shift nurse. I was standing at the end of the hallway with my back against the wall, reviewing the notes I had taken from the previous nurse. Whilst reading over my slip of paper, I felt what could only be described as a hand dragging its fingers horizontally across my abdomen. I jerked back and looked around, but I was completely alone. 2. The Call Light Symphony. Although I do not have a particular story about call lights, it was a normal occurrence to have call lights in empty rooms triggered. Even in rooms where the wires that were attached to a call button were unplugged from the wall. Some nights, the nurses would be forced to respond to several phantom calls from empty rooms. 3. The Empty Room Ghost. At the very end of one of our halls contained a habitually empty room. The heat and air conditioning unit was broken, so patients were never placed there. The nurses and aides would use that room for privacy during personal phone calls, to poop in peace or do whatever else needed some seclusion. One evening, I headed into that room's bathroom to touch up my makeup and fix my hair. I left the bathroom door slightly ajar while going about my business. I was putting my hair up in a bun when the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. Mid-heart attack, I spun around and jerked the door back open. The room was empty. The time it would have taken a human to exit the room would have been longer than it would take me to open the bathroom door. I'd also like to note that there was no furniture in the room, nothing a human could have hid behind. I'm convinced it wasn't a living person who slammed that door. 4. The Last Farewell. One patient we had residing in the long-term unit was a middle-aged woman with severe Down syndrome. She was mostly nonverbal, save for a few words she would utter randomly. She was very sweet and always had a smile on her face. It was my turn to help her eat dinner the night this story takes place. She didn't have the motor skills to eat properly, so I spoon-fed her while we caught up on cartoons on her TV set. This particular night, she acted completely out of character. I didn't notice at first because I was engrossed in the show we were watching. I failed to notice her attempts to get my attention. She finally resorted to using grunts to call me away from the TV screen. When I did finally notice, she seemed overjoyed with something. Her mouth was stretched into a wide grin, and she was pointing at an empty corner in the back of her room. I could clearly see the corner, but nothing else. I looked back and forth between her and the corner, but couldn't understand what she was trying to communicate. She was pointing, giggling, and waving at apparently nothing in the corner. I tried asking her what she was trying to show me. Simple yes and no questions. She could nod or shake her head to. I became uneasy with her actions because I knew she was seeing something I could not. After I finished up feeding her, I walked back out to the hallway and was immediately approached by a fellow nurse. My stomach sank and I felt queasy while she told me the next-door neighbor of the woman I was just feeding had passed away during dinner time. 5. The Widow Watcher. Not my story, this was told to me by a fellow nurse. My friend Mary worked the night shift at the same rehab as I, but this story takes place years before I was hired there. Mary was close to one of her patients, and she went out of her way to make her feel special. The patient was an elderly woman with no living family and was chronically lonely. Emily. When Mary bonded with Emily, it became a habit of Emily's to wait by her room's window, which faced the employee parking lot. So when she saw Mary walking up to the building, she could wave. This became a special occasion for Emily, and the two would wave to one another before and after Mary's shift, while she traveled to and from the employee parking lot. Then Emily fell ill and was unable to get out of bed for a while. Every time Mary pulled up for work, she would check to see if Emily was waiting by the window. When she didn't see her, she would know walking in that Emily was still sick. This went on for a few weeks. Mary would pull into the parking lot, hoping to see her sweet patient up and out of bed and waiting patiently to wave to her. Then one day Mary showed up at work and saw Emily standing at her window, peering out over the employee parking lot. Mary was thrilled and hopped out of her car and gave Emily a gleeful wave. But Emily stood motionless and did not react to Mary's exuberant greeting. Puzzled, Mary headed into the building, only to quickly find out Emily passed away earlier that day. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them. 2. I grew up on a Civil War battlefield, the same battlefield that General Lee and Grant first fought, the Wilderness. Everywhere you go in the area, there are historical markers of events that took place, from Lee and Grant and Stonewall Jackson and so much more. Although there are historical markers, they don't tell the complete story. Sometimes history is lost. One piece of history from this battlefield that's not really written about is the actual fate of the troops who died. Most of the battlefield was engulfed in flames from artillery, and the wounded just suffered a painful death from being burned alive. My bedroom was facing into the dark, mysterious woods. As a young child, my friends and I would build forts and cabins in those woods. Due to the presence of copperheads in the area, we would build our fort and clear it of any leaves and debris. Doing so, we would find hundreds of leather soles from soldiers' boots and partial uniforms, buckles, and other artifacts. Since those days, I've always wondered if we were building these silly forts on a mass grave. There was a neighborhood located not too far on the other side of this battlefield. I had friends who lived there, and we would traverse the spooky wilderness day and night to hang out. Through my teenage years, I have traveled hundreds of miles through those woods. I could go on and on about all the apparitions and other sightings I have witnessed. Nothing compares to the feeling you get when you witness and feel these spirits. There have been times when I am trekking my way home and I just want to run because I'm unsure of the spirit's intentions yet. It makes you stop and try to understand them, good or bad. Every time I got brushed by a stick or a branch from the trees, it would spook me. It felt like some soldier was on the ground grabbing me, desperately trying to get away from the horror. The only light you have in the sky above you, and sometimes the glowing moss along the trail. Not much light at all. It's pure darkness surrounding you for the most part. You'll see apparitions at times, but being alone, you ignore them, as if they're in your head. I never feared for my life, but I felt the terror others went through in a spiritual way. The Rebel Yell. If you're wondering what the Rebel Yell is, it was the battle cry of the Confederate Army. You can actually find a video on YouTube of the old veterans making this yell. It's from the 1930s and very interesting to watch. Anyway, the poltergeist troops could be heard from time to time, but you never knew if it was someone out in the distance at 3 or 4 in the morning or a troop screaming for help. What was very unsettling was when you could smell burning wood followed by cries of help and rebel yells. At the bottom of the neighborhood I grew up in, there was an old railroad bed that was being funded before the Civil War. When the Civil War broke out, the funding for this railroad has stopped. Since the bed for this railroad was already laid prior to the Civil War, it was utilized by Civil War troops. They called it the Abandoned Railroad. Only a few Civil War books cover this railroad, yet it was very vital to the outcome of the Wilderness Battle. Fast forward after the Civil War, the railroad was completed and used for about 70 years. Eventually it ceased operations in the 1930s. The reason why I am bringing up this railroad is because it was part of the trail that I would walk through during my walk to see friends. Sometimes you could see a light out in the distance as if a steam train was en route. As you stare at the light, you could sometimes see what appeared to be troops flanking across the abandoned track. This was actually an event that took place in the wilderness battle. And it was not much of a story. It's one of those things. You'll have to be there to completely absorb the feeling of the area. It's been well over 20 years since the last time I've been there, but I think about this area often and actually want to revisit. I'm not sure if it's because I miss the area, or if the spirits are calling me back. 3. The house where I grew up is over 100 years old, and my parents still live there. My dad has actually lived in that house his entire life, and my grandparents built out the attic space into 2 additional bedrooms when he was a kid. The back bedroom of the upstairs was the room my sister and I shared when we were kids, and is directly above our living room. There have been so many times when I would be alone in the house and in the living room, when there would be a crashing sound coming from up in our room. Think someone dropping a stack of books. I'd run upstairs, but nothing was ever out of place. I didn't say anything for years because I figured no one would believe me. When I eventually told my mom and sister, they looked kind of shocked, but both admitted they'd also been hearing the same noise for years. When I was 16, I was playing Super Mario World in the alcove of my bedroom. I was facing the window with my back to the rest of the room. When you start a level in the game, the screen kind of fades to black for maybe a second or 2. When this happened, I would see the reflection of a man standing behind me. Thinking it was my dad, I whipped around to ask how he managed to sneak up the stairs. The stairs creaked like crazy. But there was no one there. I reset the console over and over again, but the man was gone. I told my dad what I saw, and he seemed a little spooked before he told me that I had described his father who died before I was born. After that, he refused to acknowledge that we ever had that conversation, and believed that I was just seeing things. The last big occurrence happened when I was 17. This was before the house had central air, so the summers were spent with windows open to circulate air. I had the front door open, but there was no breeze that day. I was playing on the computer when the front door swung shut and latched, a 100-year-old door that has to be latched in a very specific way. I froze when I heard footsteps going from the front door, past me and into the kitchen. As the footsteps went past me, I heard the sound of a woman humming. To this day, I still get freaked out when I'm alone in that house, even though I know there isn't anything malicious there. 4. My dorm in my sophomore year of college was haunted. Strange events happened all the time. And as an apartment full of very excitable girls, we were all easily spooked. One of my roommates tried to calm us down by searching for logical explanations for everything that happened. But there were way too many coincidences. It started with little things. The lights would flicker, off every now and then. A strange singing sound echoed in the walls, at strange hours of the day. We could all hear a door opening at one end of the apartment. We didn't see anything move, but we all heard it clear as day. And outside of the apartment in that direction there were no doors. Our bathrooms had motion-detecting lights. I walked out at night a lot to go to the bathroom, and the light would be on. I didn't think anything of it until one night my roommate and I were talking at like 2 a.m. with the door closed, and she saw the bathroom light come on. I didn't see it because I'm virtually blind and can only see really bright lights. We noticed the bathroom light doing this for a few nights. And then we started noticing that not long after the light would turn on, we'd hear a door slam. So one night after the slam, we left our room and knocked on our other roommate's door. They were dead asleep. And the only other door in that direction wasn't one that you could slam. It was definitely spooky. Around the time all these strange little things were happening, I started feeling a very dark presence. I wouldn't say I'm the most sensitive to things like this. I try to pretend sometimes that I don't hear things that go bump in the night. But this darkness couldn't be ignored. It hovered low over me and gripped me with panic at random moments. I didn't understand it. It would come out of nowhere. One night, my roommate and I were the last two getting ready for bed. She had just gotten out of the shower and brushed her hair, and she wedged the hairbrush back onto the shelf. I say it that way because of what happened next. She crammed that brush between various objects on the shelf that held it tight, and turned to me, and we were talking. And then the hairbrush fell off the shelf. Okay, whatever. She lodged it back in place. We weren't talking for 2 more minutes before this time it was ejected from the shelf. We both went silent as she picked it up. And then, of course, her music box started to play. It never played. She never had it play, but it started slowly, softly playing. I Know My Savior Loves Me, which was quite possibly one of the scariest songs it could have played at that moment, barring something like Ring Around the Rosies. We went to bed, and I remember I wasn't as darkly scared as normal. I was able to get to sleep for a few hours, and then I woke up with the darkness right over me. Of course, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it inches away, and looking down at and hating me. I jumped out of bed, sobbing. I really didn't want to wake up my roommate, since we always went to bed at such ridiculous hours, but I cried enough that she woke up, and when I told her what I felt, she took me seriously. We pushed our beds together for comfort, and because we are Christians, prayed together. I laid down, and suddenly everything was different. The cold darkness was gone. I felt a warm and powerful love, a familiar spirit that I knew. One of my best friends had killed herself a couple of years earlier, and I swear in that moment I could feel her holding me and telling me everything was all right. The next year, the university converted that building into boys' dorms instead of girls' dorms, since it was on the street, and some creepers were looking at girls through the windows. But the coincidences didn't end. A boy killed himself on one of the upper floors. The boys would talk about the building not feeling right. And then one day, one of my friends was looking in the ceiling of his apartment, which was the apartment where my friends and I used to live, and I found a Ouija board. We destroyed it right away, and I moved out of the area, and I don't know what happened after that. But I know that apartment was haunted, and it wasn't by anyone very nice. 5. I'm traumatized and can't sleep in the dark since. When I was young, I had a paranormal experience that traumatized me. I am now 26 years old, and this story still haunts me, since I still have to answer to what happened. I have always been a little skeptical about paranormal stories. I believe in them since that day, but I still have a rational judgment before telling myself what I can believe is paranormal. My mother raised me, my sister, and my brother alone. We all knew my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. I remember them a little, but it's still quite blurry. My great-grandfather passed away from cancer when I was 5, and my great-grandmother died when I was 7. Shortly after the death of my great-grandmother, my mother and us were talking about them while watching Asterix. It's something we watch near Christmas in Quebec. About how much we missed our great-grandparents. Later in the evening, we all went to bed, and we heard a heavy bam come out of nowhere. It was as if lightning had fallen near our apartment. My mother panicked and came to check if we were safe. We fell asleep after this event, not giving too much importance to it. From the next day, paranormal activities started. It started with little progressive things. The volume of the television went up and down on its own. The lights flashed. There were noises in our locker and little things to which we gave no real importance, since we were always looking for a rational reason for the events. Then, after a while, this is worse for me. I don't know if it was sleep paralysis, but I would wake up at night in my bed, and I would hear a bang on the wall behind me with a constant pattern. It marked me so much. I was even paralyzed with fear. I could not turn around, neither move nor speak. It lasted a few days. I remember panicking and talking to my mother about this problem. I did not even want to sleep in my bed. I slept with my little sister for a while. Paranormal activity has never been beyond this. But we were all so scared, and my mother, not knowing what to do, had brought us to church and brought rosaries. I remember hanging it on the bed, and at night it was my only consolation to my probably irrational fear. It stopped the days my mother told us that we should talk and tell the ghost that we were okay and that he had to leave. Since the activity stopped for a while, but it left me with a fear, and since then I can't sleep in the dark. I am 26 years old today, and I still wonder what happened, if people experience similar things. I've believed in the paranormal ever since. I never had them explain what I've been through. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 368. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do hit that like button. Think of hitting the like button as your way of training YouTube to show my videos to other people. And if you'd like to get early access to these and all of the videos, then you can do that by supporting me on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. You can do that for as little as $1 or more a month. And let me know if it would be worth opening up memberships on the channel. I could make early access part of that feature as well. I know some people don't like Patreon, and that's fair enough. You'll also find a link in the description to the Hellfreezer merchandise store on Teespring. And if you really like today's video and you insist, you can leave a tip by clicking on the heart with a $sign underneath the video. Never required, but I appreciate it, and it helps me a lot. Okay, I don't think there's any other business as far as I know, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is: have you ever watched a television show, a movie, or something like that you've had literally no interest in the subject matter, but the actors are good and you like the actors? I mention this because I've been watching, and I won't keep watching, and I know I won't, but I've been watching The Crown on Netflix recently. And you know, it's Jared Harris, Matt Smith, many actors in there that I thoroughly enjoy the work of, and there's such great performances, but I have literally no interest in the royal family, or their nonsense, or their story. I think maybe there's a bit of curiosity, just a teeny sliver of a curiosity about the older stuff, the stuff that didn't happen in my lifetime, but I certainly will not be watching probably beyond season 2 at most. Although there are other actors coming into the show that I do like, I know from having a look at the cast list, because they kind of rotate the actors every couple of seasons. But that's mine, so why don't you let me know what yours are, if there are any, in a comment below. And before we go, let's have the answer of the day from a previous video. And this answer comes from Paranormal Stories 366. And the question, I believe, was supplied by my moderator Shigar, and that was, do you like that pins and needles feeling? He does, because he's a strange boy. And today's answer comes from Grey Warden. If at least only it was the pins and needles, my limbs have the tendency to go completely numb, like all cold and no feeling at all in them anymore, and I can also barely move them. Feels like there is rubber attached to me. It takes me a while of rubbing and trying to move before finally the pins and needles start, which is quite a relief by that point. Thank you very much for your answer, Grey Warden. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.